Okay, first and foremost, let's talk a little bit more about the intro here. Now, this episode originally aired in 1986, but by the time I watched it, they had changed the opening sequences on every single episode. Like, all the reruns after 99, they still continued rerunning the older episodes from the 80s and 90s, but they changed the opening scene. Now, I didn't know this until much later, but the original opening consisted of some really cool looking 2D animation combined with live action footage. Like, basically, it was a butterfly flying around, and first it came to a beach scene where there was a kid reading a book next to a sandcastle, and then this animated butterfly turns the entire scene into a cartoon scene. Like a dragon appears behind the sandcastle, and then the kid reading a book becomes a king. And there's knights in shining armor on horses leaping around. Next, we see two girls sitting on the front steps of an apartment building, or some kind of house in the city, and the animated butterfly transforms this scene into a space scene. These two kids become astronauts, and they go into a spaceship, and they're surrounded by stars and planets and satellites. And finally, there's a little boy sitting by a stream, reading a book. And I should also point out that as each of these kids open their books, they turn into these fanciful cartoon characters. Here we see some very small buildings, and this boy turns into this man. Perhaps he's supposed to be Paul Bunyan, because he's standing next to some small buildings, and then he's pulling what looks like a toy boat on a rope, but maybe it's a regular-sized boat, and he's a giant. So I assume he's supposed to be Paul Bunyan there. And then the butterfly kind of transforms into a book himself. The book opens up, and out comes a rainbow, and the words, "Reading Rainbow." And that's how the original intro played out. But I did not see this intro at all until a bunch of years later when I started borrowing some VHS tapes of Reading Rainbow from the public library, because they still had, like, the original versions. And this older episode from 86, The Milkmakers, originally had that 2D animated intro, but the intro was changed in 99 by the time I watched it in 2001, and it had this newer one that we saw before in My America. This newer one combines live action with 3D animation, and it features LeVar and a bunch of kids being surrounded by books and seeing all kinds of wonderful things in them, learning about different stuff. And not just the visuals, but the tune of the song is totally different as well. Remember how in the episode My America, the whole thing basically took place in a chroma key setting with LeVar standing in front of the United States map, and there were all these fancy things in the background as LeVar was just standing there walking around on this computer-generated map, pointing to different things? Well, that's basically the only episode of the series that takes place within the universe that's the newer intro represents. Because the 99 version of the intro shows LeVar and the kids walking around in these fancy digital rooms, opening up books and being surrounded by all these fanciful things. Well, in this particular episode, we're actually going to get a taste of what the animation style of the original intro looks like. Towards the middle, there's going to be a cartoon scene which will describe all of the different components of what makes milk nutritious. We'll talk about that later. Now, another thing you might notice about the intro, if you're at all familiar with the post-2000 episodes, like My America, all the episodes made after 99, the very end of the intro shows the rainbow swooshing around the picture, revealing the words "Reading Rainbow" really fast. But in all the edited versions, the ones where they put the new intro on all the old episodes, the rainbow actually goes around a lot more slowly. I'm not sure why they did that. I don't know if they did that because there were a lot of episodes where they had to cover up a few extra seconds of the original intro, because every single one is a little bit different depending on how much stuff is in the episode. Sometimes the end of the intro is 2 seconds, sometimes it's 5 seconds. It always varies. And in this case, the picture does kind of like a quick dissolve to this farm scene where we see all these cows, but the music abruptly stops. And then for a few seconds, the audio is just silence. the editors must have made a little mistake when they did this. Instead of continuing the music for a few seconds, they left that part silent, and then all of a sudden we hear, like the second half of a moo, and then we hear the audio beginning like it should. What this most likely means is that the very end of the original song kind of continued after the title wiped away, and they showed the first few seconds of the cows. But then when they redid the intro, they wanted to cover up that little bit of music, but instead of putting the new music over top of it, they accidentally left that part silent. So that's what happened there. And during that silent part, the words that appear on the screen that says hosted by LeVar Burton, that's the font that they used from 1983 until, I believe, 93. Like the first 10 seasons of the show. It's like this older fashioned looking, like they're bold, as opposed to the newer style that they did in the 90s, where I don't know the names of these fonts, but the letters always looked a little bit thinner later on. And that's the same font they're going to use for the credits at the end. Okay, here we go, and now we see a very young LeVar, who has a lot more hair on his head than he has on his face. In fact, he's perfectly shaved here. And he's feeding milk to a young cow from a big bottle. Like a great big baby bottle. And he finishes it. The bottle is empty. Yep, it's all gone. And he tells the little cow that some of the big cows over there might give him some more milk. And then he turns to us, and instead of just saying hi, he says, "Hi there." That's how he often began the show during the first 4 or 5 seasons. He'd say, "Hi there." He tells us that everyone knows that milk comes from cows, but there's lots of other animals that make milk too. Like elephants, armadillos, porcupines, bats, and even whales are milk makers. It says that animals that make milk to feed their young are called mammals. And then we cut to the cows behind him, and they kind of turn around and look at him and start mooing. LeVar says, "I think I've been overheard by a herd who feels it's been overlooked." Because, of course, cows are mammals too. And then he pulls out the book that he's going to share with us, and it's called The Milk Makers by Gail Gibbons. Another notable difference in these earlier episodes compared to the later ones is that when he first holds up the book, he tells us the title right away, and then describes what it's about, whereas later on, he would kind of give us an idea of what kind of story we're about to hear, and then he holds up the book and tells us the title. In this case, he picks up the book right away, which, for whatever reason, was just sitting there on a pile of hay. He says, "The Milk Makers" tells us all about how milk is made, and he thinks it's utterly fascinating. We're only 2 minutes in, and already we have some hilariously brilliant script writing.